Good morning. We are about ready to start our broadcast. Thank you for joining us today on Who is Eyeing Your Form I-9. I am Cynthia Woods, VP of Sales and Marketing for AccuSource, and I will be your moderator today. The presentation will last approximately 45 to 50 minutes with a Q&A session to follow. Please present any questions that you have via the chat function on the GoToWebinar software. We will get to as many questions as we possibly can live, and any questions that we are not able to answer live, we will go ahead and reach out to the person asking the question post-webinar to provide them with an answer. A copy of this presentation will be available approximately 48 hours after the presentation is completed on YouTube, and if you would like a copy of the recorded presentation, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll make sure that we make that available to you. So as we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenter today. Dave Basham is with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office Verification Division. Dave joined the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in 2008 following his retirement from the U.S. Army. He has conducted over 500 Form I-9 and E-Verify presentations to nationwide audiences, including elected officials, immigration attorneys, compliance personnel, human resources and payroll professionals. Dave conducts ongoing sessions for associations that include the Society for Human Resources Management, American Payroll Association, and the National Notary Association. In 2016, the American Payroll Association presented Dave with their annual APA Government Partner Award in recognition of his services as a government agent to the payroll community. In 2014, Dave was elected as the recipient of Arkansas SHRM's Society for Human Resources Management Friends of HR Award. Dave's military assignments were numerous in the infantry area. His military service decorations include the Legion of Merit. Dave is originally from West Virginia, but now makes his home in historic Virginia. So at this point, I will go ahead and turn this over to Dave Basham.
Okay. Hey, Cynthia, I certainly appreciate the opening there, and a quick shout out there to AccuSource for having me on for today's session on the Form I-9. Very informal. I'm going to go through this PowerPoint and give you a lot of tips on some of the do's, some of the don'ts, some of the most common questions that we are asked, and not only some of the common questions, but some of the more advanced questions or the behind the scenes items, if you will. So feel free to go ahead and jot some notes throughout the session. I think you heard Cynthia state that this PowerPoint, this recording will be available on their site within about 48 hours after we're done today. But we do highly encourage you to send questions throughout the session, and we'll address those at the end once I present all the material. So let's go ahead and jump into today's agenda. Yeah, we're going to look into this revised I-9 that came out last November. We're going to look at it into detail. We'll look at storage and retention and some resources. As you heard Cynthia in the bio that she had provided, I work at the Verification Division of USCIS, and we're the home to the Form I-9 and E-Verify. It's in the division I work in that actually develops the I-9, I-9 Central. That's your website, your one-stop shop for everything on the I-9. You might want to jot that down, I-9 Central. You'll see it on the resource page here at the end, as well as the E-Verify. I'm one of about a dozen that present the I-9, whether it be via a webinar like we're doing here today or in live sessions around the country. I like to start my sessions by going over this slide right here, the Immigrant and Employee Rights section, known as IER. You see they're within the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. They changed their name here back earlier this year. They were previously known as OSC, the Office of Special Counsel. Why do I start my presentation showing this slide? The major takeaway on this slide is it's the Department of Justice IER section that enforces those anti-discrimination provisions of the INA, of the Immigration Nationality Act. Now, what does that mean? Let me give you an example. If at the time you're completing the I-9 with your employee and you get to the point where you're ready to complete Section 2, and if you were to tell the employee which documents that you want them to provide, DOJ's IER section consider that document abuse, document discrimination, because you're kind of guiding them, or you're telling them which documents you want to present. If you feel heading into today's session, you wonder, hey, is some of our policies or procedures, whether they be verbal or in writing, in regards to how you complete or the guidance you provide your employees in completing the I-9, and that includes E-Verify, you wonder, hey, are we treading in that gray area of discrimination? You can pick up the phone and dial IER within DOJ. Look at the bottom of the slide. You see that employers may also contact IER, the phone number 1-800-255-8155. That's their helpline. When you dial that number, you can remain anonymous. Yes, they have their attorneys and their investigators that rotate on that helpline. When you dial that number, they pick up the phone. They don't want to know your name, your company, your NAICS code, your city, your state. They simply just want to hear your question, and they'll respond to it. Utilize that as much as you can. I can't stress that enough, and this is why I start my presentation off with providing this slide and their number and their helpline, because as many of their attorneys or their outreach individuals that I've spoke with around the country, Dave, are you pushing our helpline number because they'd rather help you on the front side than to meet you in the courtroom? And if they meet you in the courtroom, more than likely they're not going to be sitting at your table. So let's look at the I-9 requirements. As I'm sure all you know, you need to ensure that you have an I-9 on file for all your current employees. And when we say all your current employees, those that you hired and that are still working for you, that you hired after November 6, 1986. So yes, if you've had somebody working for you since 1990, you have to have an I-9 on file. We'll talk about, well, Dave, what do I do if I'm missing an I-9 on someone I should have one? We'll talk about that in a future slide here in a minute. But as you see here on the slide, this revised I-9 came out back November 14th of last year. And you had to start using it to be compliant starting the morning of January 22nd of this year. So you might ask, well, Dave, if it came out November 14th last year, and here we have to start using it here at the end of January this year, well, what happened in that gray period of time there? Well, during that period of time, you could either have continued to use the previous version of the I-9, you could start using the current version of the I-9, you could have conducted, or if you will, used both I-9s, meaning, hey Dave, for the first month or so after the new one came out, we continued to use the previous version, but then we slowly transitioned into using the new one. So there was a period of time there where we were using both. That's fine, but when you woke up the morning of January 22nd of this year, to be compliant, you need to start using this current version of the I-9. Now, as you see the second statement there on the slide, the only exception to having an I-9 are those employees that you hired on or before November 6, 1986. Further, a common question that we received anytime a new version of the I-9 comes out, hey Dave, since a new version come out, does that mean we need to complete a new I-9 on all our current employees? No, you don't. But let's talk about that last statement on this slide. You can delegate the authority to complete the I-9 to a responsible agent. What are we talking about there? For those of you that have remote hires, for those that are not familiar with that, remote hires, what are we talking about? Let's say Cynthia is there in California, and she calls me, and I work in Washington, D.C. here. She calls me in Washington, D.C. and offers me a job to be an office manager to a new office they're going to start here in Washington, D.C., and I accept the job. But Cynthia says, hey, Dave, we're not going to fly you here to California to complete all your onboarding packet. I'm just going to mail that to you, Dave. I go, that's cool. So when she mails it to me, maybe within that packet is the I-9. As it states here on the slide, she can delegate to anybody she would like to complete the I-9 on her behalf. When she sends me that packet, maybe she says, hey, Dave, I want you to go to, maybe Cynthia as a friend, a former employee. Maybe it's a family member right here in the D.C. area that she wants me to go see to complete Section 2 on her behalf. She can do that, but look at the last portion of that sentence. Cynthia's firm retains the liability for any errors that that individual that completes Section 2 on her behalf conducts or completes. Anybody. She could also say, Dave, I want you to go to a notary, to a librarian, to an attorney, to whomever. So the key takeaway here on that sentence is make sure if you're having someone else complete Section 2 on your behalf for your remote hires, that they truly know what they're doing. Let's go ahead and continue on here. On this slide, you see here's a snapshot of the current version of the I-9. Now, all the snapshots that I'm going to show you on this PowerPoint today are of our fillable form of this current version. Fillable form. What am I talking about? Well, first, when you go to our I-9 Central website, which is where you can print off the I-9, when you bring up that website on the home page, you go about 3/4 of page down, and toward the left you'll see where it says Form I-9. You can click on that. When you do that, it brings you to another page, and on that page it'll ask, hey, do you want to open up the instructions or the manual? Our manual on the I-9 is called Guidance to Employers on Completing the I-9. We also call that the M274 Handbook. Then there's another area where you can click on to open up the I-9. When you click on that and you open up the I-9, it opens up in a fillable format. Fillable, meaning once you open it up on a computer, you could have the employee sit right down there and start to type in their information in Section 1. You, the employer, you could scroll down and then you could type in your information in Section 2. It's a fillable form. I didn't say e-form. I didn't say electronic. I said a fillable form. Now, if you're filling out this revised I-9 via the fillable form format that we're providing you, you still have to print it off to have the employee sign on page 1 and date, and you, the employer, sign and date there on page 2. You cannot, I say again, you cannot use an electronic signature nor an electronic date on the fillable form. You cannot. Fillable form. Now you might say, well, Dave, that's fine if for those that want to use the fillable form, but when we open it up in the fillable format, you know, we simply just want to still fill it out pen to paper. So how do we print that off? Simply print it off, and then when you print it off, you can fill it out pen to paper. That's fine. Now, I told you on these snapshots that I'm showing you here on the fillable form, if you look on the left-hand side, which is page 1, look at the very top. You see those 3 tabs? Those are new. The instructions tab in the center is start over tab, and on the right-hand side is print. So if you open it up and you want to print it off, simply hit print. By hitting print on this version, it's only going to print off 3 pages. The 2 pages you see on the screen here, and the list of acceptable documents. That's all it prints off now, 3 pages. You know, in the previous version, when you would print it off, it would print off 9 pages, didn't it? It printed off those 6 pages of instructions, pages 7 and 8, like you see here before you, and page 9, the list of acceptable documents. But now, like many government sites and instructions, the instructions is in its own separate tab, if you will. Look at the top page all the way there to the left. Click on instructions. By doing so, that'll bring up the instruction pages. Now, I'll tell you, the instruction pages now have gone from 6 pages to 15. You may say, Dave, why'd y'all go from 6 to 15 pages? There's many reasons, but let me give you some of the top reasons. Well, first, like any form that comes out, there's a base set of instructions, right? With this being this revised form where you can fill it out not only pen to paper, but also via a fillable format, there's an additional set of instructions there. Additionally, there's some new blocks that were added on to this version that weren't on the previous version. So with that comes a set of instructions. Although there's some of the same blocks on this version that was on the previous version, there's some new rules to the game now on some of those. We need to explain those. Additionally, during the comment period, like any government form that comes out, comes out in the Federal Registry for a public comment period. And during that comment period, there are many individuals that stated, hey, USCIS, we wish you would expand upon the information you're providing in the instructions so we won't have to refer to that M274 handbook as much. So those are just some of the top reasons. But let me remind you, when an individual is completing, the employee is completing the I-9, you still have to provide the instructions to them. Now you might say, now hold on, Dave, you mean if we're filling out the I-9 pen to paper, we have to run off those 15 pages of instructions to provide to the employee? No, I didn't tell you have to run them off. What I told you is you have to provide them to you. If you elect that you want to run off those 15 pages of instructions, that's fine. Provide them to them. What's to say, though, after that employee completes that I-9 that you don't pull back those instructions and hold on to those written instructions for your next employee that completes the I-9? There's nothing to say that although you might have the employee and maybe you, the employer, complete the I-9 pen to paper, that although you might print off those 3 pages, those 2 pages you see on the screen before you in the list of acceptable documents, but what's to say that you can't show them the instructions tab there on the computer when you open it up and say, hey, if you have any questions on how to complete it, hit the instructions tab right there, and it brings it up there on the computer. So hopefully you see what I'm telling you. You don't have to run off the instructions. All the guidance states is you need to be able to provide those instructions to the employee. The button there in the top in the center, start over, what is that? Well, if you're filling out the I-9 via the fillable format, and let's say the employee gets 3 or 4 blocks into filling it out, and they realize they've made some mistakes and they just want to start over, simply click Start Over. That'll clear out the entries and they can start filling their entries in again. Okay, here's some Form I-9 exceptions. You're not required to complete an I-9 for these individuals that are on the screen here. Well, let's look at that second group. The independent contractors for whom you don't set your work hours or provide tools to do the job. Now, hey, we're not just talking about contractors, meaning maybe there's a construction company that's coming to build an addition onto your company there. But, many companies hire what they call contractors. In my sessions, I kind of title or talk to them as those 1099 employees. Now, the payroll community is quick to tell me, hey, Dave, they're considered 1099 vendors, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Now, I'm not telling you 100% of the time you don't have to complete an I-9 on those 1099 employees, but I'm telling you it's a very, 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 very high percentage of time. Why do I say not 100% of the time? Because it really gets down to your HR directors, your payroll directors, your legal counsel, truly discussing what is the true relationship between that individual and your company. And anytime that I talk about the United States today, as you see, you're not required to complete an I-9 for those employees that are working outside the United States. When I say United States today, for purposes of talking about the I-9 and E-Verify, as you see at the bottom of the slide, we're talking about the 50 United States District of Columbia here in Washington, D.C., Guam, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. They're also known as the CNMI. They were federalized back in 2009, and they're located very near Guam. Here's the list of acceptable documents. I told you when you hit that print button, it's going to print off those 2 pages in the I-9, and it's going to print off this page right here. I will tell you on this version of the I-9, there were no new documents that were added on, nor were there any taken off. You still utilize this page in the process of completing the I-9 as such. When it gets to the point when you're ready to complete Section 2 with the employee, you simply show them this list of acceptable documents, and you tell them, hey, we need you to provide 1 document from List A or a combination of 1 from List B with 1 from List C. That's it. I'm sure many of you that have worked around the I-9 for a period of time have heard maybe those employees respond back to you by asking, well, what does everybody else present? Or what would you like me to present? Don't answer that. If you did, remember the the Department of Justice's IER section consider that document discrimination, document abuse, because you're kind of leading them as to which documents you might want them to provide. Your response should be, well, I can't really answer that, but you can provide anything you would like, one from list A or a combination of a B and C document. Okay, let's jump into each section here on the I-9. But before I jump into that, here's another major takeaway on this session. And if there's any takeaway, this is the top priority takeaway. If you haven't already, and maybe if you already have, rerun those instructions of the I-9. Yes, and I want you to read all the pages of instructions, but I really want you to hone in on those first 2 or 3 pages where it talks about what needs to be completed into each block. Make sure when you read that you have a yellow highlighter in your hand, even if you're seasoned in using the I-9. Why? Because I can tell you there's some things in each one of those lines that tells you some new rules of the game that weren't on the previous versions of the I-9. You're going to see what I'm talking about here real quickly. Not only should you do this yourself, but if there's anybody else within your firm that has their hands in the I-9 process, I recommend you make it like a training session. Bring everybody together. Make sure you're all on the same sheet of music. Let's jump into this. So here in section 1, on page 1 is broken down into 3 subsections. Here's the first subsection, the employee information. On the first line there, the last name, first name, next block, middle initial. Let's stop there. Middle initial. In the instructions, it states if the employee does not enter a middle initial, they must enter an A. You hear me knocking on that wood. They must. That's different than on the previous versions. So if they don't enter an A, they must enter, if they don't enter their middle initial, they must enter an A. Let's go to the next block there. Other last names used, if any. On the previous version, that block was just titled Other Names Used, if any. Now it's Other Last Names Used, if any. But guess what? On this version, it states if they do not enter any other last names used, that they must enter an A. They must. Now you might say right off the bat, wow, Dave, we didn't know that. So we've been having individuals, been completing this revised I-9 for the past couple months. Does that mean if they haven't been put in an A that we need to pull those I-9s out and we need to write in an A? No, you don't as the employer, because remember, this subsection here, the employee information subsection, and the next subsection, which is the employee attestation, is completed by the employee. So if something needs to be completed in one of those blocks, such as NA wasn't written in there, you need to bring the employee back in and have them write that NA in there. Now you might say, well, Dave, that employee no longer works for us. What do we do? Well, you can't fix if they're not there, right? Just make corrective action moving forward. Let's go to the next line. You see the address line? In parentheses, we put street number and name. Yeah, that's the preferred address, like 123 Main Street. Why do I say preferred address? Because on this version of the I-9, they can also put a P.O. box, street number and name, or the P.O. box. Yes, that's different. On the previous version, they couldn't enter a P.O. box. Now, let's stop here for a second. On the I-9, there's 3 address lines that could possibly be filled out. Possibly. Here's the first address line here. At the bottom of the page 1, that prepared translator certification block, there's an address line there. If prepare a translator is not used, nothing's going to be put in that block, right? That's why I say possibly could be used. On the second page, there's an address block there where whoever completed section 2 wrote in the information. They're going to put the company's address there. Of those 3 address blocks, this address block here in section 1, the employee's information, their address, is the only address block where a P.O. box is acceptable. On the other 2 address lines on the I-9, it must be the street number and name. Let's continue on that line. You see the apartment number, if applicable. Maybe they don't live in an apartment, right? But guess what? Yep. The instructions state, if they don't enter an apartment number in that block, they must enter NA. We have the city or town. Then the next block is state. Oh, you see there's a drop down there. Yes, if you fill in the I-9 out via the fillable form, there's several locations there's a drop down. Then there's the zip code. Let's go to the third line, date of birth. Look at the date of birth, the format there, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year. Now, if you're filling out the I-9 via the fillable format, you must enter it in this format. Yes, you must. Why? Let me jump ahead of myself here real quick. You know, many are calling this revised I-9 here, if you're filling it out via the fillable form, liken it to a smart I-9 or an enhanced I-9. Why? You know, after they're done completing page 1, at the bottom of page 1, there's a button that they would click. It's called click to finish. So when you're done, they hit click to finish. The minute they do that, it reviews all the entries that were put onto page 1. And it's going to check 2 things. Number 1, were items put in the correct format, i.e., did they enter the date of birth into that 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year format? If it wasn't entered in the correct format, it's going to signal an error in that block. The employee will scroll up. They'll see that that block is lightly shaded like a light red, and there'll be a comment off to the side. They must enter their date of birth in a 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year. The second thing it's checking is to ensure that there's an entry made into those blocks where it's required to have an entry, meaning, let's use an example. Let's say that they didn't put an apartment number in that block. They left it blank. Well, when they hit that click to finish button at the bottom and they scroll up, they're going to see that there's an error in that apartment number block, and it's going to have a comment. They must enter an apartment number or enter NA. So you see, it's checking things in a correct format. It's checking to make sure there's an entry into a block. So whether you realize it or not, it's kind of doing like a self-audit for you. It's kind of helping both you and the employee, correct? Now, let me tell you this on the date of birth. If you're filling out the I-9 via the pen to paper, although that's the format that they should be putting that in, if you go to I-9 Central, remember our one-stop shop website with everything on the I-9, and in the FAQs, frequently asked questions, there's a question there that states, hey, if the individual doesn't enter the date of birth in that 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year, but the date that they entered is easily recognizable, is that okay? Yes, it is. But if they're filling it out via the fillable format, then it must be entered into that 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year. Let's go to the next block, Social Security number. Now remember, the Social Security number field on the I-9 is an optional field, caveat, unless you're enrolled in E-Verify. If you're enrolled in E-Verify, as it's outlined in the Memorandum of Understanding, they must enter their Social Security number there. But let's forget about E-Verify here for a second. Let's say that this company is not enrolled in E-Verify, then it's an optional field for the employee to fill out. The next 2 blocks, the employee's email address and the employee's telephone number, those are optional fields. But guess what? They're filling it out via the fillable form. If they don't enter their email address in there, they must enter NA. If they don't enter their telephone number in there, they must enter NA. Let's go ahead and go to the next subsection, the employee attestation. There's a couple things I want to talk about here. Remember, this subsection is completed by the employee as well. The first, when you see those 4 categories, the employee selects one of the 4 categories. One. Look at number 3 there. On this example on this slide, we've selected number 3. Where that employee is attested to be a lawful permanent resident. You look off to the right there, there's 2 blanks. In that first blank where there's an A there with the red arrow, that's where they're going to enter in either their alien registrant number or their USCIS number. The next block off to the right is only going to appear if they're filling out the I-9 on the fillable form. And when they hit that drop down, it's only going to give them two options. It's basically asking, hey, that number they just provided on the left, is that their alien number or their USCIS number? That's it. Look at number 4 below there, the alien authorized to work. If the employee selects or attests to being number 4, an alien authorized to work, the major change in that section here versus the previous version of the I-9 is that they will also need to provide, you see those 3 sub-numbers underneath that number 4? They need to provide the information for one of those 3 sub-numbers. So if they attest to being an alien authorized to work, then they need to either provide number 1, their alien registration USCIS number, or their Form I-94 admission number, or the foreign passport number with the country of issuance. 1 or 2 or 3. Yes, that's different than the previous version. You'll see to the right of that QR code block. Don't worry about that. If you're filling the I-9 out via the fillable form, or if you use an electronic I-9, I can tell you when you print those off that there'll be some numbers and codes that will come out, print out on that block, but there's nothing for you to be concerned about there. You see below there where we have that in red line, the rectangles there, the signature of the employee and the date. Yes, that's where the employee is going to sign, and that's where they're going to fill out the date that they filled out, section 1. Look at the bottom of this slide here. I've already told you the employee needs to select one of the 4 categories. Look at the second comment. The employee must complete section 1 no later than the first day they start working for pay. Yes, on the first day they start working for pay, the employee needs to complete section 1. Now this is where I'll have employers go, hold on, Dave, I thought we had 3 days to complete the I-9. We'll talk about section 2 in a second. But here's section 1. The employee must complete section 1 no later than the first day they start working for pay. But let me ask you this. When's the earliest an employee can fill out the I-9? When's the earliest? You know, it could be before they start working for pay. But under what circumstance? Want you to offer them employment and they've accepted that job anytime from that date, but no later than the first day they start working for pay, you can complete the I-9 with them. Let me give you an example. Let's say that for this example, I live there in California. Cynthia called and offered me a job on the 22nd of May, and I accepted the job. But she said, hey, Dave, for payroll purposes, we're not going to have you start working for pay until 1 June. I go, okay. Well, here today, the 23rd, I bounce into Cynthia's office because I'm in the area just to do a meet and greet. While I'm in there, Cynthia says, hey, Dave, how would you like to fill out some of your onboarding paperwork? Can we complete the I-9 today? I don't start working for pay till 1 June. Yes, we can. Why? Because remember, on the 22nd, yesterday, she called and offered me the job, and I accepted it. So you can complete the I-9 before the individual starts working for pay. The key is, have they been offered and accepted the job? A follow-up question many times I receive is, Dave, hey, does that offer have to be in writing or verbal? Can it be verbal? Yes. It doesn't have to be in writing as long as you have offered the job and they've accepted it. So you can complete the I-9 before they start working for pay. Remember the key, have they been offered and accepted the job? Let's look at the bottom of page 1, the Prepare Translator Certification block. I will tell you, nothing really changed in that block per se, but we did add 2 additional blocks right underneath the title, and there it is right there. But before we look at that, because we added that, and we talk about this a little bit more, it's brought on more questions from employers. Okay, based on this, Dave, can you give us the true definition of what's a preparer or translator for the I-9? Let me give you some examples. Let's say that day I walked in to complete the I-9 there with Cynthia. Maybe I hurt my wrist playing basketball with my granddaughter last night. It really hurts to write. So when we walk in, I'm completing the I-9. I asked Cynthia, it really hurts to write. Will you, if I tell you what to write in each block here on the I-9, will you fill it out for me? She can do that, but by doing that, she's a preparer. She's writing the information in for me. A translator. Maybe English is not my primary language, and someone needs to translate the I-9 to me, then that individual is the translator. they would have to fill out this portion right here. Now that brings me to those new blocks that are right underneath that title. You see underneath there, the block on the left-hand side says, I did not use a preparer or translator. So when I was completing the I-9, if I didn't have anybody write anything in those blocks or have to translate, I, the employee, am going to mark I did not use a preparer or translator. But if a preparer translator was used, then the preparer or translator would check the block off to the right there that states a preparer and or translator assisted the employee in completing section 1. On the left, if a preparer translator wasn't used, then I, the employee, mark that block. If a preparer translator was used, they would check off the block to the right. Now remember, after you finish page 1, if you're filling out the I-9 via the fillable form, there's that button on the bottom. Click to finish. Remember, that's where you're going to click that, and it's going to review those entries there on page 1. But let's go ahead and go to page 2. If you look at the top on page 2, you see where there's the last name, first name, and the middle initial. Right, just to the right of middle initial is one of the 2 new blocks that's on this page in comparison to the previous version. That first new block there on the top right-hand side is citizenship/immigration status. What do you put in there? Because remember, page 2 is your baby to complete as the employer. All you're going to do is you're going to look back, and I've taken my slide back here, which one of those 4 categories did the employee select? In this example, it's number 3. So all you're going to do on the top right there is you're going to put number 3. Now, granted, you see number 1 there, and we're talking to our PowerPoint team about, getting that number lined up there. But all you're going to enter in there is which number category did they select back on the employee attestation section. 1, 2, 3, or 4. That's it. You see we still have list A, B, and C blocks. There's no changes in those blocks, but I will tell you, if you're filling out the I-9 via the fillable form, the title lines of each list A, B, or C, there's a drop down there where you can simply hit the drop down and it'll provide you all the list A documents under list A. If you hit document title on list B, it'll show you all those from list B of the list of acceptable documents. Look at the second new block that's on this page. You see right there in the center, big block, additional information. What is it? What's pretty much defined in the title. If you have any additional information that you would like to explain, there's an area. We heard from the public during the comment period, or even before that. Hey, USCIS, in the past, if we've got additional information, you've told us to write it on a sticky or write it on in the columns or in between paragraphs. We need an area. We heard you. There it is, additional information block. Off to the right of that is the QR code block, just like on the first page. Don't even worry about it. Below that is that certification paragraph where whoever is completing section 2, whoever in your company is seeing those documents that the employee is providing, that's holding those documents, is the individual that's going to write in the information up there in section 2, and then they're going to print out their name, sign, etc. there. Remember, you can't accept Skyping of documents. Someone taking a picture of a document on their phone and then showing it to you. Teleconference, televideoing documents. You actually have to see the documents, hold on to those documents. Let's look on the left-hand side. I told you section 2 is your baby to complete of the I-9. The second comment, section 2 must be completed no later than 3 business days after the employee starts working for pay. Remember, section 1 needs to be completed by the employee no later than the first day they start working for pay. But you, the employer, have up to 3 business days after they started working for pay to see those documents from the individual and for you to write that information here on page 2, sign and date. 3 days. Let's talk about that. We still get lots of questions on the 3-day rule. Let's say for this example, Cynthia's company is open Monday through Friday and closed on Saturday and Sunday. If I started working for pay Monday that week, what day of that week does the I-9 need to be complete to be compliant? And remember, the true definition of a completed I-9 is both section 1 and 2 are signed and dated for it to be compliant. What day of that week? Some say Wednesday, some say Thursday. When the actual answer is Thursday, why? Look back at that left-hand side, that paragraph. Must be completed no later than 3 business days after. 3 business days after they started working for pay. If I started working for pay on Monday, that would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I give you the example that Cynthia's company is closed on Saturday and Sunday. Why? Let's say I started working for pay on a Thursday. Based on that, when would the I-9 need to be complete to be compliant? That would be Friday, Monday, Tuesday. You see on the lower left-hand side there, the documents that are shown you by the employee must be the original documents. The only exception, you can accept a certified copy of a birth certificate, and the documents that are shown you must be unexpired. Examining documents, genuineness, and photocopies. We don't require you to be a document expert, but let's really hone in on that second comment there. You must accept the document presented by an employee if it reasonably appears to be genuine and relates to an individual. This is where I have many employers during sessions will raise their hand, hold on, Dave, this is not my first rodeo. We've had some extensive training on fraudulent documents, and our policy goes up and beyond that by saying ABC, XYZ. Well, the policy says, as you see right here on the screen, you must accept a document presented by an employee if it reasonably appears to be genuine and relates to the individual. If your policy goes up and beyond that, if I were you, I'd pick up the phone and call the Department of Justice's IER section, run that policy by. And as you see at the bottom, remember, documents must be unexpired, and they must be original documents. The only exception, a certified copy of the birth certificate. We've added this slide here in the past, I guess we're going on 4 or 5 months now, as there was a new rule that came out that was effective January 17th of this year, where there are some of the EAD cards, those employment authorization cards, auto extension. You'll see in the second comment there were certain categories, and you see there on our picture of the EAD card, the example, see that first circle in the middle of the page. There are certain categories there that those EAD cards were auto-extended for up to 180 days, as you see the third comment. So our key here is, and you can always visit our I-9 Central page, if someone shows you an EAD card and they says, hell yeah, it's expired, but it's been auto-extended, you go, what are they talking about? You can go to our I-9 Central page, or you can pick up the phone and call our help number Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'll show you that number here toward the end, where some of those EAD cards are being auto-extended up to 180 days. We want to make you aware of this. So if that does occur, you'll go, oh yeah, I remember Dave talking about that. Receipt rule. What's a receipt? You can accept a receipt for a document, a list A, B, or C document during the time of the I-9. You might say, hold on, Dave, I'm not familiar with that. Let's talk about that. Remember this right off the bat. A receipt is just temporary proof of a document. That's it, temporary proof. Look there at the first line. A receipt shows that your employee has applied to replace a document that was lost, stolen, or damaged. That means they already had the document. It had already been issued to them, but somewhere along the line, it was lost, stolen, or damaged. True story. Although I work here in D.C., I live in Virginia, and in Virginia, where we get our driver's license, it's called the DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles. I lost my driver's license. I bounced into the DMV. I paid the $20. The young lady said, Mr. Basham, here's a receipt for your driver's license until we mail you your hard driver's license to your home within the next week. So see, I'd already been issued I wasn't initially applying. I'd already been issued it. I lost it. They provided me a receipt. I could have bounced out the DMV that day, went across the street, a restaurant was hiring. They needed somebody to work, started working right away. Me and the employer completed the I-9 right there. She showed me the list of acceptable documents, and maybe I had documents on me. I showed her my list B and C document, my receipt for my driver's license, and my Social Security card. She would have to accept that receipt. But look under number 1. You see that sub-comment? That receipt's only good for 90 days. Remember, it's temporary proof of a document. So if I can't show her my driver's license in this example, within that 90-day period from the day I started working for pay, she can terminate me. Because remember, a receipt is just temporary proof. Now remember, you're going to have access to this slide excuse me, this entire slide deck and recording, so you can take a look at these other items here on this slide, but I really want to call your attention to that very last comment down there. Receipts are never acceptable if employment's going to last less than 3 business days. Copying documents. You can either read what you see here on this slide, this paragraph, or you can remember this. You make a copy of every document that's shown to you for purposes of the I-9, or you don't make any copies at all. It's one or the other. This is where I have sometimes at conferences, individuals will come up and say, hey, Dave, we make a copy of every permanent resident card and passport shown to us. So we're good to go, aren't we? No, they're not. They're making copies of 2 selected documents. It's either all documents or none at all. We recommend if you're making copies of those documents, you keep them with the I-9. It's not, you don't have to, it's just a recommendation. Let's look at the last section on the I-9 on page 2. That's section 3, re-verification and rehires. I will tell you there were no changes in how to complete the re-verification and rehire section here. But the 2 most common questions I do receive is, Dave, when do we re-verify? What documents? You'll see this next slide. We'll come back to it here in a second. The second most question I receive is, Dave, if an individual changes their name, they get married, divorced, or just otherwise change their last name, do we have to fill out section 3? Look at the bottom of this slide right here. See that second comment? You may also complete section 3 if you look at the second sub-comment under that. Update the biographical information of an employee. You may update their name change in section 3 if they change their name. You may, you don't have to, but like anything with the I-9, be uniform. If you use section 3 to record the name change for one employee, you better do it for everybody that changes their name. Now, I told you the most common question that we receive on section 3, which documents do we have to re-verify, which do we not? Look right off the bat. You do not re-verify those documents there to the right. U.S. passport, passport cards, permanent resident cards, or any of the List B documents. Remember, a driver's license is a List B document. You do not have to re-verify any of those documents once they expire. Now, there are 2 exceptions to the permanent resident card. You see that there in the center of the page. So utilize this chart. Keep it handy. If you get stumped or you go, ooh, what did Dave say about that? Remember, you can go to I-9 Central or pick up the phone, call our customer care line number Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., your time zone. Why do I say your time zone for our call center? Because our call center locations are in Buffalo, New York, here in Washington, D.C., Lincoln, Nebraska, and Los Angeles. Correcting mistakes and missing forms. Yes, you can correct a mistake on the I-9. How do you correctly correct a mistake? Simply line through the item that needs to be corrected off to the side, make the correction, initial, and date. That's it. No strike over, no whiteout. But let me ask you this. If an item needs to be corrected in section 1, who should make that correction? Let me give you a hint. Who did I tell you complete section 1 at the beginning of today's session? The employee. So if the employee completes section 1, if an item needs to be corrected, you need to bring the employee back in to make that correction. Once again, if they no longer work for you, you can't correct what's not there. Missing forms, look below. What do you do if you're missing an I-9 on an individual you should have an I-9 on? Follow me here on the screen. Well, let me give you an example. Cynthia started a company 4 years ago. Here it is 4 years, and the day she started her company, she hired 10 employees. Here it is 4 years later, she has the same 10 employees working for her. Today, she's doing an audit on her I-9s. She realizes she's missing one, and it's on me. What does she do? Look here at the screen. She immediately provides me with that I-9 to complete. Now, scratch that second sentence there. There's been a recent change on that. You have the employee complete the I-9 as soon as possible. It's not a 3-day limit for those existing employees. Maybe you're just missing one on. You don't backdate the I-9. What are we talking about there at the bottom when we say don't backdate it? Cynthia provides me the I-9 today. Hey, Dave, I know we finished that, completed the I-9 4 years ago, can't find it. When I sign and date the I-9 here today, I don't backdate that date 4 years ago. I date it today because that's when I'm filling out Section 1. When I show Cynthia those documents, maybe I show them tomorrow to her, and she fills in Section 2, when she signs and she dates it tomorrow. That's when she saw those documents. But there in the middle of page 2, that date she certifies I began working for pay, in that block she's going to put that true date I started working for pay 4 years ago. Now, if you're following me here, you're going, now hold on, Dave. If Cynthia gets that I-9 audited, she's going to get written up for a late I-9 because she's stating that you started work 4 years ago, but you and her just filled out the I-9 today, and you showed her the documents tomorrow. That's more than 3 business days. Yes, it is. But it's not going to be as painful as if she has me backdated or she backdates it and gets caught. Remember, these auditors do this for a living. They know all the tricks to the trade. And in this scenario I gave you would be an easy one for them to catch. Why? Because this version of the I-9 wasn't even in existence 4 years ago. Be very careful with that. Storage and retention. Make sure you have an I-9 on file for all your current employees. We're going to talk about it here in just a second. What do you do with an I-9 after an individual leaves? As you see here on the slide, store them anywhere you want, on-site, off-site, but if you get a notice of inspection, whether it be ICE that comes in, remember it's our sister agency, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, that does the audits on the I-9s. They come in. You have to be able to provide the I-9s within 3 business days. We recommend if you're making copies of those documents for the I-9 that you keep the copies with the I-9. I kind of talked about that a while ago, but it's not a must, just a recommendation. And make sure only authorized individuals have access to those I-9s. I know you're not putting them in a 3-inch binder and putting them in the lunchroom, are you? Retention. How long do you retain the I-9 after that individual no longer works for you? You fired them or they quit. Here it is. You retain the I-9 for 3 years after the date you hired an employee or 1 year after the date employment terminates, whichever is latter. I know it's a mouthful. I like examples. Look at the bottom of your slide. Cynthia hired John on November 1st, 2014, and John left the company on July 5th, 2016. So how long does Cynthia retain that I-9? Look at the bottom of the slide there. She looks at the date she hired him. There on page 2, the date he started working for pay. She takes that date, adds 3 years to that date. Put that date off to the side. She takes the date that he left. In this example, July 5th, 2016. She adds 1 year to that date. Put that date off to the side. Which of 2 of those dates are latter? In this example, November 1st, 2017. That's how long Cynthia needs to retain this I-9. Where does she retain it? That's her business. What does she do with that I-9 after that retention date is come and gone? We don't tell you. When I say we don't tell you, what does that mean? You're not going to find that in our I-9, our M274 handbook. You're not going to find the answer to that on our website. Nor are we here, me today, going to tell you what you must do with that. All we tell you is you must maintain that I-9 up to that retention date. Now, let me take my official hat off. Why would you want to keep it? Let me put my official hat back on. Keep that I-9 up to that retention date. Now, if you have certain city, company, state laws that state that you must maintain it up and beyond that period of time, then obviously you're going to follow that. We're just talking about you from a federal side on the I-9 retention rules. Follow that date period and you're good to go. Resources, I'm about to wind down here just within a minute or so, so remember to go ahead and send in those questions. I-9 Central, I've talked about that several times today. Here's the links. It's available both in English and Spanish. The M274, remember that's your handbook. Guidance on completing to employers on completing the I-9. Also on I-9 Central, you can see Know Your Rights, mergers and acquisitions. Hey, we're buying a company or merging with someone. What do we do with our I-9s? We have a section on I-9 Central with that. Also, you'll see there's an example of those acceptable documents and some additional documentation requirements that are on I-9 Central. Customer service. There's that number right up top. I've talked about that number. You had any question on the I-9 or E-Verify Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. your time zone. There's our hotline number, 888-464-4218. There's an employee hotline number, and you'll see there's our email addresses and our websites. And ladies and gentlemen, this is just a basic disclaimer. This is simply meant as an informational and instructional session on I-9. So I hope that this has helped you or cleared up some items. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cynthia and her crew to ask any questions that have been sent in. Back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Dave. So now we'll start our Q&A session. Destiny Esper from our marketing department will be reading those questions. So Destiny, go ahead and ask the first question.
Thanks, Cynthia. So our first question today is, what's the difference in the fillable form versus the paper version of the I-9?
Great question, and that is a common question that we receive. The paper version, obviously, is still where you're filling out pen to paper, where an individual can still run off the I-9, fill it out pen to paper. The fillable version is when you open up the I-9 there in the computer, where you can actually sit there and have the employee sit right down there, type in their information in section 1. Maybe after I'm done and using that example with Cynthia, maybe she scrolls down and she starts to complete section 2 because I showed her the documents. But remember, on the fillable version, what helps you is those bottoms of each page, if you're filling out fillable, where you can click the finish button where you would have to. And remember, it's there to help you catch some of those errors, okay? You don't have to use the fillable version. You can still continue to use the pen to paper. But once again, if you have any questions as to how to fill out either one, remember, visit our website or feel free to call our customer care line number. Back to you, Destiny.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so our next question is, you said section 1 has to be filled out by the employee on their first day of employment. Can you add additional information on that?
Well, there's not really as much to add in as the employee just needs to complete section 1 on their first day. And why do we reiterate that? Because I still run into tons of times where employers go, oh, well, we thought that they had up to 3 days to complete it. You know, if they started to work for pay on Monday, Dave, sometimes we don't have the employee fill out the I-9 until Wednesday when they show us the document. So we just want to reiterate, remember, section 1, those first 2 subsections on page 1, the employee information and the attestation section, must be completed by the employee, but no later than that first day they start working for pay. But you, the employer, have up to 3 business days after they started working for pay to gain those documents from the individual and complete and sign section 2. Back to you, Destiny.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Our next question is, can we use an electronic signature on the fillable version of the I-9?
Still a very common question. No, you cannot use an electronic signature, nor can you use an electronic date on the fillable I-9. Now, I say that again. You can't use an electronic signature, electronic date on the fillable version of the I-9. I say that because I'll have individuals that come back and say, hey, Dave, you gave a webinar here last week or last month, and you said I can't use electronic signature on electronic I-9. No, I said you can't use it on the fillable version of the I-9. Okay? So with that, back to you, Destiny.
Perfect. All right. And our next question, and this might actually be our final question as we are running out of time, is can we use whiteout to make a correction on the I-9?
No, you cannot. No whiteout, no strikeovers. Watch this, Destiny. I'll turn that 7 into a 4 to a 4. Simply line through the item and needs to be corrected off to the side. Make the correction, initial and date. Back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I believe that is all of the time that we have for today. Cynthia, back to you.
Thank you, Destiny. Well, I just wanted to close up by saying that on behalf of AccuSource, we thank everyone for joining us today. We are happy to assist with any additional needs that anyone attending today has. AccuSource provides electronic Form I-9 and E-Verify services. As Dave had alluded to, there are additional options as far as electronic Form I-9, and we would love to provide additional information on those. We will be hosting another webinar in a few weeks to share the benefits of utilizing electronic Form I-9 as well as E-Verify services, and anyone who is attending the webinar today will automatically receive an invite to that webinar as well. So thank you once again for your time. We greatly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today, and we wish everyone a great rest of their Tuesday. Thank you.